Hey there everyone, this is Cloudchief, and for this video I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to go in and touch on my history with Final Fantasy XI. Now, I'm still going to be working on all my other videos, so don't be like, oh, is it going to be changing the format? I still have a laundry list of videos that I'm working on and trying to go through them. Some of them are very time consuming, other ones I can kind of knock out. But I'm trying to pick and choose what would be the best way to release them. I thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and make a video talking about my history with Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy XI and how I came to play it. So, ever since I was a little kid, I always enjoyed playing games, whether it was even just board games or even video games. My first gaming system was actually Atari 2600. Loved that, and then eventually stepped up to the NES, and my actually first interaction with Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy I on the NES. And it was interestingly enough that I was actually hanging out over a friend's house, and his older brother was playing Final Fantasy I, and I was just kind of like, whoa, well, what is this game? This game looks, very different than the typical, Mario or Zelda, action platformer game. And it was just like, okay, what's going on? And, seeing how, you go into these instant fights and, you're telling, which mobs you want to fight, what actions you want to do, and just the whole concept of it, seemed very interesting to me. And then, I remember it was later, I think he was starting a new game. He kind of pawned it off on us to just roam around the starting town and just kill stuff, so he's getting some gold and level up, and just kind of pawning off a lot of the early grind on us just so he's getting powered up. But I mean, it was our first time using it, and I actually was quite enjoyable, and I enjoyed the game. Then eventually I actually, another friend of mine had it, borrowed the game. I don't think I ever owned, I never owned Final Fantasy on its original NES cart. I at this point have, whatever remakes of it and stuff. I know I have the PlayStation version, the re-release that I think they came out with Final Fantasy 1 and 2, even though I've never played 2. But I'll get into that in a second. But then I think the next Final Fantasy I played was 4, but for us in the US that was considered Final Fantasy 2 on the Super Nintendo. And I thought that was an absolute amazing game. Played that through multiple times and was just, blown away by it. Then I think my next game after that, which technically isn't even a Final Fantasy game, was Mystic Quest. It's technically, like I said, it's technically not even a Final Fantasy game, but the North American distributors thought that they could sell more copies by, giving it the Final Fantasy name. And it definitely worked, because I know that's why I bought it, and boy did that game suck. It was so bad. It was still enjoyable though, because, as a somewhat young, impressionable gamer, playing an RPG, I still had fun with it, as bad as the game was. But even after I remember playing it and beating it, I was I just left a bad taste in my mouth, and I'm I want to go back and then play 4 or 2, however you look at it. I think I'll start calling them by the actual Japanese name, not the American release. So I wanted to go back and play 4. I think I borrowed it again from my friend and played through it and just really enjoyed that. Trying to think. Then probably next game that was released was Final Fantasy VI, or 3 for us in the US. But I remember before 6 was released, reading about it in Nintendo Power, and just being all excited about it, and trying to tell my mom, being oh, I really want to get this game, and it has a ton of gameplay. I remember Nintendo Power saying it's it has 100+ hours of gameplay. My mom's why would you want to play a game for 100+ hours? I'm well, I mean, that's a lot of content in the game. That means there's a lot of stuff to go through. She's 100 hours? That's a lot of hours. I don't want you playing that, that much. And I actually never even got 6. For a while, my mom was actually against it, and I remember my same friend who I borrowed 4 from, I eventually borrowed 6, and I remember even having to try and sneak it, because I know at that point, just growing up a lot and going to church and everything with my parents, my mom was like, well, you know, she didn't like all the magic and everything, and, you know, just thought it was somewhat more evil. So I remember sneaking and playing, you know, Final Fantasy VI, just making sure whenever I had it on, like, she wasn't going to come down, because I had our gaming system was set up in the basement. So I would only play it when I knew, like, she was out or not around, and if she was going to be around, I made sure I popped in a different game. So I just find it funny that I'm, like, sneaking Final Fantasy VI, but that was such an amazing game, so elaborate. And then I think after that, I just started, you know, playing a lot of other games, and I didn't get a PlayStation 1 for after it was released for a while, and I remember even seeing, you know, the commercials for it, and friends had Final Fantasy VII, and I was like, oh, that looks amazing. And but I didn't play it for, probably was released for probably at least a year and a half before I actually got a chance to sit down and play it. But I did actually purchase 7, really enjoyed it. Then I purchased 8. I remember I purchased 8 probably pretty soon after its release, and I just couldn't stand 8. 8 was just absolutely horrible. It just, the story was boring. The whole draw system. I mean, I'm not gonna get into that, but I mean, I know a lot of people have been like, "Oh, 8 was amazing." I hated 8. I never liked it. I played it through and beat it once, and typically I like to go through and then beat a game, and then I will go back, and I like to go through and, like, get everything. I know I've done that with, like, all the other Final Fantasies that I mentioned beforehand. I know with, like, 7, I've gone through, I've gotten, like, 3 copies of all the different mastered materias, gotten, like, everyone's ultimate weapon, and, you know, just, like, decked it out. And I remember going back and I'm like, oh, well, let me go and try doing it with 8. And I don't even think I got through the first disc, and I was like, I can't do this anymore, especially with the whole, what was it, triple triad card game, trying to collect all the cards. Once all the rules started spreading, and it was just getting hard, where it was like, whatever cards they flip, they take, and it was just like, I can't do this, and I don't think I've ever picked up the game since. Then 9 came out, remember getting 9. 9 was a good game, however, for whatever reason, I had trouble getting past the whole super deformed character model. I just kind of had a problem with that. I've never liked the whole super deformed characters in kind of any series when they've done it. I know, like, a bunch of different series have, like, taken whatever and then they put it in, you know, make it deformed. I just didn't like the characters. However, I mean, I've played through 9, I think 2 or 3 times, and it's definitely a good game. The story's good, the gameplay's amazing. I remember sitting down with my one buddy, and I'll be talking about him a little more shortly, but we probably sat down in his basement and spent probably 6 hours trying to beat Ozma at not very high levels, and eventually doing it. And I know that fight was, like, really hard, and I'm trying to remember, we kept trying so many different party combinations to try and come up with a combination to pull it off. And I remember, I know we used Quina for Magic Hammer to drain his MP, and I'm trying to remember who else. I think her name was Aiko, so that way she could cast Phoenix, so everyone had re-raise. And, you know, like I said, I had fun with the game. There was something about the character models I couldn't get past, and that just really prevented me from, like, really diving into 9 the way I did with other games. Then 10 came out. I know a lot of people have given 10 a bad rap. I personally really enjoyed 10. I do know some of the characters are weak, like Titus, the main character, he's kind of a weak character, but that's kind of, for me, was more what I liked about it. I'm always kind of down with the underdog. And since he did kind of seem like a little whiny pussy, I didn't really appreciate that aspect of him. I still really enjoyed the game, and not to mention I really liked the gameplay, how they had it set up where you had Arin to break armor on enemies, you had Waka to hit flyers, you had Lulu for magic. I mean, I really liked the whole system they had set up, and I thought it was a good game overall. The story had some parts that were, a little lacking, but I still really enjoyed the game, and 10 was probably at that point one of my more favorite Final Fantasy games. Like I said, I know a lot of people have trashed it, basically be like, oh, it's not, but I mean, I really like the sphere grid. I like the fact that I was able to go through, get everyone an ultimate weapon. I built ultimate armor, so everyone had auto protect, auto regen, auto shell, and then I think it was break HP limit, so, and then everyone's ultimate weapons, so everyone's hitting for, you break the 9,999 cap, so you can get up to, so you're hitting 99,999. I just really liked how the mechanics of the game was built. I liked filling out the sphere grid, so basically every thing was filled. I didn't fill in all the blank spots with stuff, because I know you can add stuff to the blank things, but spaces in the sphere grid, but just, getting everyone fully acclimated in the sphere grid. At that point, pretty much everyone's the same character. There's no real difference, since it was segregated for essentially different jobs. But I really enjoyed that. And then I remember when 11 was announced, and they're like, oh, it's going to be online. And me personally, I kind of stuck my nose up at it. I was like, nah. I'm like, I don't really feel like playing online. Plus, I'm like, it's got a subscription fee. I'm like, I don't want to pay a monthly fee to, play a Final Fantasy game. I'm like, that just seems stupid. And I got to make sure I have an online connection. I'm like, I'm not interested at all. And I'm like, I'm not going to play it. And interestingly enough, my friend who I was talking about, who we wouldn't beat Ozma with, he really wanted it, because he's always been about the Final Fantasy franchise, and he just really wanted to get it. And I remember him getting it, and then trying to get it hooked up. I remember he asked me to help him so we actually ran a phone line so he could use dial-up off of his PS2, because he got the PS2 version. When I finally got 11, I got the PS2 version too, with the hard drive sticking out of the back and everything. Oh man. But yeah, I had to help him run a line, because his family had a business, so they had, their one phone line, and then they had a fax line, and he would be using the fax line to dial up and play the game. And I even remember we got everything set up, got the software installed on his PS2, got the modem hooked up so that way, he can actually connect to the internet. And then came the great process of the POL update. I want to say when we finally got to that point, it was probably a week and a half before he was finally able to log in and play the game. Because of just doing dial-up download, it was brutal. It was constantly disconnecting, and he just had so many problems trying to get his game updated so he could even connect to the servers to play. But then he finally got connected, and interestingly enough, his connection was constantly dropping while trying to download updates to be able to play 11. And yet, once he was finally able to play, he didn't really have connection issues with the actual game when you're playing in-game, which you'd think it would have. But, so I remember he created a character. He actually created it on a different server than what majority of my time was playing. I think it was Pandemonium. And he made a Gulka for whatever reason. He just wanted, a big, strong guy. I remember he also had the name... you can pick your name. I remember he tried picking a few names and all of them were taken, so then he just started going through and let it auto-translate it, or auto-populate the name, and I remember the name that came up that he wanted was Tattered Doom, all one word. It was just Tattered Doom, and he's like, I really like that, and ended up going with it. It was okay, and and then I ended up playing 11 with him. We would take turns like leveling. I remember just running around and mostly just he picked Windy as his first starting city. Just running around. We did so many quests for Gil because Gil was not easy to make. I remember just killing all the things out in Saruta Baruta and just getting all the different rare exchange items, and then we had the Brandy strategy guide and just going and just constantly trading stuff, because eventually he ended up making another character, and that was ended up being on the server where I basically grew up on, which was Valifor. But I remember we did so many quests. Our probably just from us trying to get Gil, our fame level in Windy had to be probably level 8, because we just did so many. We would go out, try and get XP, get so many items, and we basically had a cycle where we'd go in and turn in all the items, because I know you can also turn in coronets and the Mandy buds to, I think it's Koromoro, I could be wrong, but one of the NPCs in Windy Walls. And yeah, I just remember so much running around. He started getting into excavating, digging, because he was like, yeah, chicken bones sell for really good money. I know he was really excited about that. I never did any of that with him. And I remember us getting our actual first XP party, and actually not the dunes where you would think, but in Shakarami Maze. And I remember we got to level 14, and then afterwards someone was like, oh, are you going to go XP in dunes? And we were like, what's dunes? Because we had no clue. This is our first character. And someone's like, you've never been to dunes? And of course we're in Windy, so you got to go to Mara and take the boat. So then I remember them trying to show us the trek across Boomerino Peninsula. They ended up getting aggro on a goblin, and then they were like, just keep running, keep going southwest, and you should be able to make it, kind of follow the path. And I want to say, I can't remember, I want to say we got aggro and died, and then eventually tried trekking back and finally made it there, and then just starting to XP in dunes. And it was always fun taking the ship there, because then afterwards, we'd warp back and then switch jobs. I want to say, our first job going through, we wanted to do Red Mage so we could heal, so then we ended up doing Red Mage, and then once we got our sub job, we were subbing Warrior, because we thought that was a good idea to do extra damage. And then after we went back to Red Mage, then we were subbing War, and since we were at Gulka, because we were oh, well, we could tank some also, so we were sometimes in dunes off tank. It kind of worked, because it was weird, because we didn't really know exactly what we were doing. But then I don't think we made it much past 30 on that character before he made his Taru on Valifor. And funny enough, he named that Little Tat to go off of Tatterdoom. And like I said, so then we started leveling Taro. I was kind of at the same time why do you want to start a whole new character? And he's like, oh, I want to try Mage. Plus he's like, I want to try a different server, see how people are on there. So we started doing that. And then he probably got Little Tat maybe up into, I don't know, the 30s on White Mage and Black Mage, because we were focusing more on mages since it was a Taro. And at that point, that's when I finally went out and got the game myself. Got the game, went ahead and updated it, and then created my own character. And that's actually the character that you'll see today, which is Hiei. And that's still the same character that I'm playing on today. And I remember immediately starting out, and I was like, okay, well, I want to make our own linkshell, since we already had, I think at that point we had made a few friends on Valifor. And then I was starting out, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm let me, I'll start a linkshell. And so then we started our own linkshell. Yelso and Nor ended up joining it, and it's just funny that I ended up staying friends with them for, after all these years, and, we're still doing stuff together. And in fact, they're, as you guys can see, they, help me out with my videos, putting up videos and everything. But so yeah, at that point was just started leveling up my character and was on Valifor. The interesting stuff is my buddy who had the other characters, he ended up not playing much. I think he eventually made a Gulka on Valifor, and he got that to 75 war back in the 75 days. And I remember he was like, "Oh yeah, I want to build the best war on the server, one that's going to do the most damage." But I mean, like I said, he got to 75 and didn't really get much past that. He never got like sky access, or didn't do many missions. I know he did make it to TOAU areas, because by then, when he got 75, TOAU was released. At that point, I probably had 4 or 5 75s. Because I remember my first job was White Mage. I always like to try and play mage jobs for my first job, because they tend to be a little more difficult, but you're also a little further back, so you get to kind of see more what's going on. So as someone who's always been, I felt, a pretty good gamer, I always like going to my games with a little more challenge, because then I feel I gain more out of it. And also being a mage, just like I said, sitting back, you can kind of see more what's going on with the battlefield, and you can get more of an understanding what's going on and with other jobs, and so you just learn more, and that way it's easier for you to like pick up tactics and strategies for how to do well in the game. And so at that point, it was just leveling different jobs. I remember, like I said, I made a link shell and tried building that up. Sadly, I want to say, I'm pretty sure it was 4 times, maybe even 5, but 4 different times I had people, whether it was within my shell, which was, we called it Mages Inc. at the time. Well, I mean at the time, that's what the shell was called. We called it Mages Incorporated was the name that actually me and my buddy who played, we decided to come up with. And we just stuck. It was funny because we'd get a lot of tells too about it, be like, "Is that link shell only for mages?" And it never was. It wasn't exclusively for mages. It was just that was the name that we came up with. And yeah, but 4 different times, whether it was people inside the shell or even other shells that we were trying to do collaborations with, basically tried to steal my link shell, steal all my members and stuff. And it's just thinking about that, it's just kind of sad, because I remember even one time, one of the guys who tried stealing all the members ended up like coming back afterwards and was like, "Dude, being leader is a lot of work." And it's like, yeah, dude, no shit. Like, you clearly didn't appreciate all the work that I was putting into the shell before, and it's like, now you steal them, and now you want to come back and be like, oh, we'll do whatever you want and whatever because of this. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. But I also remember joining, it was probably after only the first time that like the shell kind of fell apart, and then we rebuilt it. I ended up joining an endgame shell. I wanted to build my shell up to start doing endgame, but it was so far off from that. And there were some other endgame shells I wanted to join, but at that time they were like, you can only have 1 link shell. You can't have another link shell. And I remember joining this other endgame shell, and I made sure they were okay with the fact that I had my own link shell that I was trying to run, and they said they were okay with it. But that ended up causing problems with other members, because they were like, oh, well, you're not coming to all events and you're splitting your time. I'm like, well, every day that I get on, I pop in your guys' shell, because for anyone that wasn't aware, way back in the day, while you could have as many shells as you wanted in your Mog sack or your bags, you could only have 1 link shell equipped, because nowadays you can have 2. So you only had 1 shell, and like a lot of groups were like, no, you can only have 1 shell. You can only be with this one group of people. You can't be with another group of people, because that's going to split your time. And I remember that that caused some problems with some people. And I even remember, because they were doing a lot of Sky. Sky was still somewhat new. at this point, like, people were still, like, trying to figure out Kieran. I remember Kieran would sometimes be, like, 2-hour fights. You'd have black mages, like, aspiring him to try and get all his MP, so he has no MP, so he's not casting before you try and really push damage down. And, yeah, way back in those days when, yeah, Sky was freaking crazy. You'd have, what was it, Red Mage Dark Knights, just chain spell stunning, Susie and Siryu for 100 Fists and Chain Spell. Yeah, those were the days. But, back to the endgame linkshell. Yeah, they just had some of the members just had problems. They're like, oh, well, you're not coming to events and you're not in the shell all the time. I'm like, well, I pop in, see what's going on in the shell, and then if you guys are like, okay, there's nothing going on, you guys don't need me for anything, I'm going to go into my shell and make sure, my members are taken care of. And, well, they're like, well, if we ended up doing something afterwards, I'm like, then someone can send me a tell, and I will, if I am at all available, I'll ended up coming. And I remember it just created a lot of animosity. And then it even got to the point, I remember, because they had a point system for reward. Like, basically, you would go to an event, and depending on the event and how it worked, you would get points. And then after you get points, you would actually get a reward. And at that time, I only had White Mage level to 75, as that was my first job. And I really wanted a Noble's Tunic, because that was a crafted item from, a Shining Cloth that I know Kieran dropped it, and I want to say Susie dropped it also, but at that point, that was the only place you could get it, and it was, like, worth 20 mil, and back then, like, 1,000,000 gil is probably worth nowadays what 20 mil is in-game now. Like, it was, there's been so much gil put on the servers at this point that it's just inflation. Like, 20 mil was probably, yeah, more than 100 mil item equivalent nowadays, just to try and get, a ratio understanding. And I remember the leader of the shell said to me, because at the point he said to me, he's like, we were doing some event, and he's like, are you ready to get your Noble's Tunic? And I said to him immediately, I'm like, I don't have enough points. I think you need like 900 points, and at that point I only had 500. And I'm like, I don't have enough points. I don't think that's fair. And then he was like, well, you do well at the events and everything, and, we have an extra one. He's like, I think it's, time to give you one. And I'm like, I'm not going to turn it down. I'm like, because that's a big benefit of my White Mage. I get, refresh. I, 10% cure potency. That was a big deal back in the day in 75 days. And, I remember then shortly after that, like I said, some of the people that had a problem with me having another shell, they'd be like, oh yeah, as soon as you get your Noble's Tunic, you stop coming to events, you get what you want, and now you just screw us over. And it was like, no, that's not what happened. And going over that, and just after them outright, attacking me, I was like, no, I'm done with this drama. I'm like, I'm trying to split my time and help two different groups of people, but if you don't want it, so then ended up leaving them. And then after that, just, kept doing my own thing, leveling other jobs, trying to build up my link shell, and like I said, had multiple times to try and get stolen. I remember trying to do joint ventures where it was like another shell that was a small shell. We were trying to collaborate and make one endgame shell, but other people in that shell were trying to, manipulate the leader and take control, and then they were trying to steal our members, and just whole bunch of just fiasco on. Then so after multiple times that falling apart, after I think, like I said, the fourth time, I was like, screw this, it's just too much effort, and I'm tired of getting stabbed in the back, trying to help all these people out, and all they want to do is take advantage. So I ended up joining an endgame shell, and Yells ended up coming with me, and then also another longtime Mages member ended up coming also. And they ended up joining this endgame shell, and I wanted to join this endgame shell for a long time, but they made it very clear, it's like, this is the only shell you can have, which is why I didn't join them before. But by that time, I was like, I'm done. We ended up joining them. I know, though, they did interview us each individually, and they were like, so if one of you guys get in and the other doesn't, is that going to be a problem? This, that, and the other? Because, you know, they're kind of like, you guys are coming in almost as like a package deal here. And so, but we all got in on all our own merits, and it was great doing a lot of stuff with them. That shell name was Ultima. They were a really great shell, but then, you know, was it probably, I don't even think we were in the shell for 6 months, and then tragedy struck. The salvage bans. For anyone who doesn't know, well, people probably know about salvage, that it was a TOAU event, and at the time, this was by far the best armor per jobs you can get. Just really nice armor, but the amount of time that you had to put in to farm salvage, it was just a lot of work. And but I remember with salvage, I wasn't doing salvage at that point, was too busy just doing other things, not to mention the main salvage static that was running out of that shell, they didn't start running until at least midnight weekdays, and sometimes, depending on events, like if we were camping Fafnir or other HNMs, you know, we wouldn't get late. They wouldn't do their salvage run sometimes till, you know, 1, 2 a.m. And it's like, I can't do that. I'm like, I have to work in the morning. I can't stay up till 2, 3 a.m. doing salvage as much as I would like to, so I didn't join. And remember my other buddy from, you know, Mages that joined Ultima with us, he started doing salvage with them. He was mainly focusing on trying to get a Nirvana. So he was mainly going to salvage for the Alex because he really wanted to build a Nirvana. But then, like I said, the salvage bans hit. And then come to find out, if anyone wasn't aware, why so many people were banned from salvage, they figured out that when you were in salvage, if you break party and form multiple parties in that run, whenever you got a drop, it would drop to each individual party, so it would essentially duplicate the item. Now, that would only happen if the item drops. So if you kill the NM and you separate parties and nothing drops, you get nothing. But yet, if you got, like, say, a 35 body piece, it would drop to each individual party. So you could, in theory, set it up so you're getting multiple drops from one thing. And from my understanding, Ultima, the members in it, they're the ones that figured this out. And somehow it got spread through forums, but they tried keeping it very tight-lipped. And because they didn't want it to get out. They knew if this information got out, SE would patch it. And after SE caught wind of that, and they actually did find out about it, they went ahead and patched it, and then they went back and banned people, and pretty much Ultima got, not destroyed, but they got hit really hard by the bans, and including our one buddy who came with us. It's sad too, because I'm pretty sure he wasn't even, like, really trying to go for armors. He was just going to help him out with Alex. And I mean, if they're like, oh, well, we're trying to duplicate drops and stuff and help out, I mean, I'm sure he was just, you know, helping out. And it sucked because, you know, they got banned. Some of the people that got banned started new characters and came back because we, you know, everyone in the in Ultima was like, well, yeah, well, we'll help you guys out. We'll help you guys, you know, re-level up. But some people were like, no, it's not worth the effort to start over. And you know, one friend who came with us to Ultima, he was like, no, I'm done. He's like, it's not worth trying to reacquire all that gear and start over. And yeah, so Ultima didn't completely fall apart, but I mean, it took a hard hit, because it did lose a lot of its high-end core members. So then some people had to step up, so then I was one of the people that ended up stepping up. being a leader in that shell. I ended up taking over that shell's Dynamis runs. And me and Yells were essentially for a few years we ran Dynamis. And that was probably one of my favorite events. Going in there, with like 30 people. We had some solid strategies. Took out Dynamis Lord back at 75 quite a few times. Got some people, Shadow Rings and Shadow Mantles. I got a Shadow Ring out of it. I remember one of the things Yell got so upset. She lotted like I want to say it was like a 986. She would know the actual, number that she lotted on the Shadow Mantle, and someone beat her by 1. Like I said, it was something was like 986, and it was outlotted by 987, and that I can't imagine that had to stink, because Yells played Paladin a lot back then, so it would have been extremely useful, but it is what it is. Neither of us ever got Shadow Mantle. Not that it's a big deal at this point, but so yeah. So then went from there. Then eventually Abyssea hit, and at that point, that's when a lot of people started leaving. And I'm not sure. Abyssea seems to get a really bad rap, and I don't really know why. I mean, I get it. I was against the whole level cap raise. I was like, no, don't raise level 75, because up until then, 11 had always been about horizontal progression. Like, you get to 75, you try and get your 75 gear, they'd have new expansions come out, like TOAU and stuff, and it didn't, some pieces did get replaced, but for the most part, gear wasn't really replaced. They just brought out other gear, and so then you had more options for gear sets. And, there was some things that were better than others, but one of the things that I've always liked about 11, at least especially back in, like, the 75 days, no one was ever, had all the gear. You could never have, like, everything, because there was just so much, and it was just so time-consuming to get it. Like, getting, like, D-Ring nowadays is pretty much a standard. Like, if you're going to be tanking or whatever, you basically want to have a D-Ring. Like, if you're coming back and playing, you kind of want to put a lot of effort into getting D-Ring, since you can just keep popping King Behemoth as long as you have pop items. But back in the day, having a D-Ring was, like, an enormous luxury, and it was, like, reserved only for, like, elite tanks. And it was just, wasn't, a lot of gear just was not easily accessible, and if you got one of these high-end items, you were some lucky ones. I remember reading forums of essentially link shells breaking over, like, E-Body from, I'm guessing, is it Nidhogg? Either Nidhogg or Fafnir? I can't remember which one to drop, because while I definitely killed both of them and camped them, I didn't camp them a ton. Wasn't in those groups that were basically in there every day, day after day, in Dragon's Aerie. But, yeah, I just remember reading from just the amount of drama that would happen over these armor pieces, because just some of this stuff was just so hard to obtain. Because nowadays, nothing's really out of reach unless you're talking about some +1 pieces, and even then, it's not even really out of reach as long as you put in enough time, energy, and effort. So, but then, like I said, so Abyssea came around, and that, raised the level cap. So now 11 started going from this whole horizontal progression to now vertical progression. And since then, it stayed that way up until kind of the point we're at now. And even the point we're at now, there's still somewhat vertical progression. It's just now hit a cap. And so it's that. But Abyssea got a ton of bad rap, and I don't really get why. I personally really enjoyed Abyssea. It was a real change of pace. I also remember when Abyssea first came out, you were very limited on the amount of stones, so the amount of time you could go into Abyssea was limited. And at that point, because they had already released the Magian trials, the Moogle trials, so that way you can get different weapons. And I remember building, me and Yells, well, I built occasionally attack twice, high damage katana, because I was all about ninja. At that point I had my 75 Kikoku. I just always loved playing ninja. Ninja was, ninja still is one of my favorite jobs to play. It's just so versatile. And back then, Yells was all about Sam, and she built a high damage, occasionally attack choice katana. And I remember some people looked at it and they're like, "Why would you build that? That's really trash." But yet she would own stuff, literally tear stuff apart with that occasionally attack twice. Could literally make light, self-light with just meditate. I know other Samus back then, they couldn't really do it. They would have to use their split TP move and then try and use but Yells was able to do it with just meditate just because of the occasionally attack choice katana, and it's and yet still would do really good damage because it had the same damage on it as Hagun, but of course you didn't have the TP bonus, but yet you're getting TP so much faster. The weapon was ridiculous. And then we also decided to build a double attack dagger. So we had that. And I remember I wanted to go ahead and get those weapons upgraded with the Magian trials. And it was there was specific items that you needed that dropped off of NMs and Abyssea. And I remember so you get our stones, and I think you get a half an hour per stone. I don't know, because you get so much more at this point because of different add-ons and things. But I remember going in with an hour and spending 50 minutes on Red Mage trying to kite dot this NM in there just so I'm getting the items so I can upgrade my katana. And it was just funny because at that time no one knew how Abyssea worked. They didn't know that you could just keep killing mobs and chain mobs to get at the time, which was ridiculous XP. I remember Yells in my first XP camp in Abyssea, and I remember when we got it rolling, we were this seems broken. It was we shouldn't be getting this much XP. There must be something wrong. And we were I remember staying up to 4 a.m. because we're I don't want to leave. I want to keep getting this XP because I'm if SC somehow screwed something up and they're gonna patch this, it's I'd rather get as much XP as I can now. But it was they intended it that way, which was just interesting. It was just such a sharp contrast of how things used to be and now how they were shifting the game. And then just all the mini expansions came out for Abyssea, and like I said, I don't know why it got such a bad rap. I enjoyed it. It actually moved to the point where you essentially needed an alliance of people to get stuff done. That with Abyssea, it was you could now get it done with 3 to 4 people working together, as long as you guys are well organized and well geared. And it started moving more towards somewhat low man, but you still needed to work with people. Kind of how it is today, but not exactly. But I really enjoyed it. I built multiple Empyrean weapons. I remember building Yukon Versa, getting that to level 90. What I can't remember, the Monk one, it was Victory Smite. Building that because Monk was actually really good back in the Abyssea days. Then built an O-Chain, then built an All-Mace, and I just had fun, farming with some of my friends the Abyssea weapons and building them up because they were ridiculous weapons. At that point, you could go and just do massive damage at the time. And I just had a lot of fun with it. And then after that, then they released Void Watch, and I didn't really get involved in Void Watch. I did it a little bit, but I was I'd rather keep building my different Abyssea weapons. And then after Void Watch, then they announced that they were going to come out with Adeline. And at that point, they were going to move to item level, because at that point, we'd already reached level 99. And I was like, really? I'm like, you guys are going to do even, like, harder vertical progression? I'm like, this is literally going to make all, like, it's going to make all my Abyssea weapons irrelevant. It's going to make all my equipment, again, irrelevant, because at that point, we had, you know, Imperium +2 armor, which is really good armor. And it was just like, at that point, I was like, I'm done. I'm like, I don't want to keep doing this climb again. Because, like I said, one of the things that I really liked about 11 was the horizontal progression. It was, you know, I get to a certain point, and it's like, while new stuff is being released and there's new way to progress, my old stuff isn't irrelevant. My old stuff is still relevant. But at this point, a lot of the, you know, older gear, it is irrelevant. Because, you know, at this point, higher item level gear, like 99 gear, you don't even want to touch unless it's like your first job. You only want to touch item level gear. You don't want to touch gear that's just 99, because the 119 gear stats just blow it out of the water. And so, at that point, when like they announced Adeline, I was like, I'm done. Yell said that they were done also, and it was just like, you know, I'm gonna go on and do, you know, do some other things, and you know, then just started playing other games, got more into like first-person shooters, and just playing lots of other games, and then eventually I got convinced to play 14. The funny thing is, I actually sat down and said, I'm not going to play another MMO. I'm like, it just takes way too much time. I'm like, and I said this while I was still playing 11. I'm like, when I finally finished playing 11, I'm like, I'm not gonna play another game. I'm like, there's just, or not another game, sorry. I'm not gonna play another MMO. I'm like, there's just way too, it just literally sucks you in, and especially for me, who tries to be a completionist and do everything. I'm like, you can't do that in an MMO. It was, unless you literally make that your life, you can't really do everything in game, and I think that's the case in pretty much any MMO. So I said I never would play another MMO, but then was eventually convinced to check out 14. I enjoyed 14 to an extent, but at the same time, 14 doesn't have, I don't know, the same dynamic. One of the things that I really like about 11 was, it's like the team game. It's something where you could go in, and if you worked well as a team, you could accomplish it. And yet, if you're not doing well, then you're just going to fall apart. And even just in XPing, just getting those levels, grinding to 75, it was just such a sharp contrast between a bad party where people aren't really working together and not really well geared and don't know what they're doing, and then you'd get a party where just everything's clicking, and it just made all the difference. And when you got in one of those groups where just everything's just, you know, working like a well-oiled machine, it was just so, you get such a gratifying feeling, and it was just a lot of fun. And that just even got more accelerated when you you know, get to endgame and you're fighting H&Ms and going up against really hard notorious monsters, and yeah, it just changes the whole aspect of the game. And it, or I wouldn't even say it changed the aspect of the game, but it was just so well, because the thing is, how 11 was built way back in the day, in the 75 days, you couldn't do things solo. And even if you could, you were very limited on what you could do. Like, you had to work with other people to progress in the game. There was just no other way. You couldn't, while there were, you could in theory take every job to 75. Like, I even test that. Like, when I was leveling White Mage, after I'd get out of party, I would then go and try and solo for multiple reasons. Not for long. I would just go and try and kill like 1 or 2 or 3 things that would yield some XP. One, just to prove that I could. So it's like, okay, if I really wanted to, I could sit here and spend 28 hours fighting easy prey mobs, each one like a 5-minute fight and get 40 XP, and I'd eventually level. So I'm like, in theory, I know I could solo White Mage to 75, but I'm not going to, because it was, one, White Mage was easy to get parties, but two, that would just be painful. But I mean, with most jobs, I typically, when I was done with a party, I would go out and try and solo at least easy praise, something that yielded XP, just to prove I could. Just so I know in my mind it would be possible. So I mean, I know every job it's technically possible back in the 75 era to level all the way up to 75 solo, but there were, unless you were like Beast, Summoner, and even Summoner really wouldn't want to do it. I'm trying to think. Black Mage could solo, but the thing is, if you were Black Mage trying to solo, you would want to solo Peace Pets. Just because you could kill them in 1 or 2 nukes. And they yield decent XP. I know Yellow's got their Black Mage to 75 because of that. So, you know, that's how, you know, they got their Black Mage up. So it was possible to, you know, get all the jobs to 75, but solo, but very few people did it unless you were Beastmaster or like you just didn't do it. You basically had to get a party if you were trying to get it done in any reasonable amount of time. And so you just had to work together. I was like, where was I at? Back to my point. You had to work as a team to get anywhere. 11 now, I mean, there are things that you have to do groups with, but I mean, since they introduced trusts, that's become very, very minimal. There's so many things that you can... I'm gonna have to stop this, and I will pick it up later, because I need to take this call. Alright, so, back to where I was at. Let's see, because I was talking about, like, the team mechanics that 11 had, because 11 really was, like I said, the way I see it, it was like the quintessential team game. I mean, nowadays you have League of Legends and Overwatch, and they're starting to get more into that. They're also kind of Destiny eye roll there. I'll probably make another video about my thoughts about Destiny and Destiny 2, because I got some major gripes about that, but again, that's for another video. But I mean, there weren't any major like team mechanic games for you know, just in general. Like 11 was really the only team one. You have Final Fantasy 14, but the thing is, 14 doesn't feel team dynamic at all. Pretty much everyone has their role, and you're essentially doing your own little dance, and everyone else is doing their own little dance, and as long as everyone does their little dance or plays their role sufficiently enough, you'll clear. And it's even that case for, you know, like the Savage content, like the hardest content in the game. I mean, it's not working together. It's not like, oh, okay, so someone screwed up something and, you know, they're dropping the ball over here. In 11, you could have teammates adjust and that would make up for it. In 14, if someone just dropped the ball, well, then you just wipe it, now you got to start it over again. And all you got to do is just have everyone, you know, play their role and do the dance correctly, and you'll eventually win. As long as no one screws up. And 14 just doesn't feel team. It's like, okay, I'm just playing with other people, but I'm doing my own individual thing with them where they're doing their own individual thing. And it just doesn't feel very team-oriented. Because, I mean, I remember, perfect example that I can think of was trying to get Joy Toy back in the day. Because that was such a great sword to have. And I remember going and, like, we knew it's, like, time of death, and we were, like, I think we might have had, like, a mule, like, logged out there to see, and I remember seeing, it was like, okay, it popped. And by the time we actually got our mains out there, there was like a group of 8 people there, and they're fighting it. and they ended up wiping. And then it was just, me and Yells, we ended up then claiming it, and we took it, just us two. And I don't mean like they got it to like 20% wiped, and then we took it from 20% to dead. I mean, no, they wiped it, regen to full. By the time we got there, because like I said, I think we had a mule sitting there watching it. I think it was probably we used Little Tat, and we ended up getting there, and at that point, we were able to duo it, because they were trying to stretch themselves out. They probably had like one healer, I don't even remember, and then a bunch of melee DPS on it. And the problem that they had is they had way too many DPS on it for spamming AoEs, that the healer just can't keep up. Eventually the healer's going to get tapped out. So they might have been trying to Zerg it, but it was just, there's a big difference in dynamics for your party setup, and having the right party setup, and everyone also carrying their weight proportionally, is going to determine the fight. And like I said, you can have someone be dropping the ball, and your team can come over and help carry you, much like you would do in like a sport, like if you were actually playing football or soccer. If someone screws up, your team can come and pick up the slack and try and carry through to win. And like I said, very few games do that nowadays. The only games that I can really think that do that and do it well are probably, besides 11, would be League of Legends and Overwatch. I mean, I'm sure there's other games. I'm sure people will be like, oh, well, there's Dota or whatever. I mean, I guarantee there's other games out there. I'm sure, I never really played like Counter-Strike or any of those, but there was such just a team, synergy to 11. And I mean, it's now somewhat gone. It's still there, but it's not what it used to be. And I don't think it'll ever go back to what it used to be. I even know there's private servers that have popped up being like it's 75 only, but I even had a period of time where I checked that out, and that was just all trash. I mean, it's a cheap version of 11. It's a free, they're like, oh, well, it's free. Yeah, but it's trash. Like I said, I tried it out for a short season. Don't waste your time. It's absolutely horrible. There's enough there, so you're playing it, and you're like, oh, it's good enough, but there's just so many glaring problems that keep popping up with it. I can make a whole nother video just on that. This video's already gone quite long enough. But, no, so like I said, back to where I was at, and then, so by the time Adeline came out, decided, it would be, I didn't want to keep going anymore. I'm like, you're just getting too much into vertical progression. At that point, like I said, quit, started playing some other games. And then at this point, it was probably about last year, I just had this feeling, just being like, I kind of want to check out 11 again. I'm like, I really enjoyed that game. It's one of the best, well-designed games I've played in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong as I say that. 11, even back in the 75 days, had a lot of glaring problems with it. I'll be making a separate video talking about just problems with 11, whether it was old problems and even some of the current problems that are with the game. 11 is very, very far from a perfect game. So, as I'm saying that, don't, misconstrue being like, oh my gosh, you think 11 is the best game of all time, this, that, and the other. It's not, but there's some kind of magic that there's with 11 in terms of just the team mechanics and just even how the mechanics of the game work in terms of fighting monsters and stuff. There's just something there that I've not seen any other game emulate, and I can't even exactly, put my finger on it. And the thing is, I have some ideas of stuff. I want to get into game development, and I'm a far way off from doing that, but I want to have one game that I have a lot of ideas for, and I really want to make this game. I think it would be a really great game. It's a lot, if you play it and you've played 11, you're going to be like, wow, he took a lot of he was inspired by 11 for a lot of things and what went into the game. I mean, there will be things that will be vastly different and things, but I mean, you will definitely tell it was a very inspired game. The funny thing is, and even looking at it, I've seen a lot of like game developers and just developers in general. Like, you'll be like watching videos and learning from it, and you can see on their desktop that they have a little icon, play online, hiding back there. I always find it funny when I see it. I'd say it's more than half. I do find it very interesting. There's just, like I said, there's something about the game. It has some kind of a, magic to it in terms of just how the mechanics work. It's just a very well-designed game. Again, it has plenty of glaring problems, but I will be saving that for another time. But then, so, back to just my history with 11. So then, probably about a year ago, came back to 11. I was like, okay, let's start checking out, this new stuff. It's like, I just felt like playing, and it's like, I heard it was much more soloable, even though Abyssea was pretty soloable, low manable, but I heard it was even more so now. It's like, okay, well then, it'll be interesting. I think it'll be worth checking out, because a lot of newer games, I don't know, they're just not as good as even a lot of old games. And I'm not even just referring to 11. It's just gaming in general. It's lost a lot of its touch that it used to be. And again, I could make a whole nother video just on that. But so ended up coming back to 11, and so then it was like post Adeline, and Yells came back too. We were both playing for probably about, 2 months, and then it was actually interesting. We saw a character who had a very similar name to our one buddy who was in Mages, who ended up coming and joining Ultima with us. And me and Yells were talking, and we're like, I wonder if that's him. It was like, something is off. So, eventually, sent him a tell. It was a while, but I ended up seeing him, and then sent him a tell, and it was him. And interestingly enough, like, we quit the game right before Adeline was released. Adeline was released, and he came back to the game. Came back to the same server. And, he came back. He still loved Summoner. He built Nirvana, and, built, his character up and everything. And at this point, he was like, oh yeah, he's like, I'm in, endgame shell. At this point, the server we were on, Valafor, was mostly dead. It was very underpopulated, especially compared to Azura that I'm on now. Like, it was very stagnant, like very little activity going unless you're in a shell. But, we were fine, soloing, doing our own thing. So, we talked a little bit, but I mean, it was a while we didn't really, hear much, and then, going back and forth. And the funny thing is he saw us too, and he thought it was us also, but he wasn't sure if it was us, and he also said he wanted to give us space. I mean, I don't exactly get that, but it is what it is. But eventually we started talking, and then he actually asked if we wanted to join his endgame shell. At this point, the shell he was in was considered the best shell on the server, even though there's very little activity going on it. But, so we were asked to join, and it was like, it was funny, we were going back and forth, because we were like, we'd love to hang out with you, we'd love to do things, and we're not opposed to joining a shell, but it was like, it's not the same as it used to be back in the day. Like, I have real life things going on, it's hard to make commitments. And he said, nah, it's very laid back for the most part, they only do events on Sundays, and he's like, other than that, it's just laid back and just trying to get things done. And so I was like, okay, sure. So me and Yells both took a shell. and find out the shell is just completely filled with elitists. In fact, there was essentially just two groups of people in the shell. There was a bunch of like lower levels who had somehow, I don't know, gotten in the shell, but they never really said anything, and from what I saw, they never really did anything. And it was like they weren't good enough to like participate in the like end game events, so they were just there, and it's like eventually they might move to that point. And then you had everyone else that was doing the events. And the sad part is, like I said, this show was so full, like almost everyone in there was like an elitist douchebag. It would be the best way to put it. Like, these people were so full of themselves, especially with the amount of time I had, put in 11. I could tell, especially since they rehashed so much content. I mean, yes, there are new fights and there's new things and everything, but a lot of things didn't change. Like, yes, there's changes. You're now, have better gear and everything, but for the most part, if you knew like 7511 well, you would know how to do stuff well in the current endgame, and you would know how to equip your character, how it's going to be played well. You like knew how to, adjust. If you knew the game well, you would have had no problems getting plugged in. But these people were just straight up assholes, and it was funny because they treated both me and Yells like we were trash. And to be fair, we didn't have good gear, and we also didn't know, because I didn't come back and immediately be like looking up, okay, so for this job, what's best in slot? What's the gear I should have? What's that and the other? We tried just figuring out progression. That's kind of how the Adeline key item came out. That actually, Yells has to take all the credit for that. It was their idea and plan and stuff, because Yells came back first to Adeline, post Adeline when we finally came back. Like I said, probably about a year ago. And then I came back, and they were trying to figure out the gear progression, which was like, okay, what's the best way to go from 99 to getting item level gear, so that way you can start participating in endgame. And that's when I figured out that they should go through and do Alluvian Skirmish. But then, basically had to backwards track how to get Alluvian Skirmish access. And that's essentially how the video came out. And once we had it all plotted out, I want to say Yells had most of it done, but not all of it. And so then when I ended up coming, I just followed the path, and that's kind of how that video came about. And then we went ahead and, recorded it, and that's how that one video came out. And it's surprising I haven't gotten comments on the video, but I've had a lot of people tell me that that video has helped them the most. And it is a really good, high-quality video, because it just shows systematically, go do this, do this, do this, do this to get it done. But then where was I going to go? But so we weren't well geared, because we also weren't looking, let me just go to whatever, and so I'm getting the best gear. It was like, no, we wanted to go through progression, and I kind of think that's the way you should be. The way I feel about 11 is it's all about the journey. It's not about the destination, and sadly, most people nowadays just treat it about destination. Oh, just let me get whatever piece I want to get, and I just want it now. And it's not, very few people take it about the journey anymore, which kind of makes me, a little sad about that, because it was always about the journey. When I think back about a lot of the things that I did for 11 days, it wasn't so much, yes, I got this piece, even though when you got it, it was a great feeling. It was more about, what did you go through to do it? Who did you do it with? Where did you go to even get access to go do whatever, whether it was Sky or Sea? It was like, because everything was an adventure. Like, just going to Sky and farming Sky, even if you got no drops, even getting drops just for linkshell mates, it was an adventure, and it was rewarding. And, it felt an accomplishment, even if you weren't even getting anything out of it, just knowing, oh, my team, my group of people who I'm doing it, they're getting geared up, and they're getting more powerful, therefore it makes us more powerful as a team. And sadly, that aspect has been lost. But yeah, I want to do another video getting into more about that. But I mean, but everyone in, you know, this shell, and I'm not going to say their name because I don't really want to bash them, but I mean, they treated us like trash, and it was kind of sad too, because they actually just didn't even have skill. A lot of these guys thought they were so amazing, but they had all, you know, all the top end gear, but then they don't even know what they were talking about. I remember one of, like I said, the lower guys was like asking. He has said, he's like, oh, so how was Ranger? And I had been playing, I'd come back enough and seen enough that Ranger was a good job. And I'd seen just, like, with progression and knowing how Ranger was at 75, it was always a strong job if you played it right. And I'd seen not that much of change and everything, and I was like, and I said, no, Ranger is probably one of the best DPS. One guy spoke up, was like, you're a fucking idiot, you don't know what you're talking about, this, that, and the other, blah, 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 blah. And at this time, this is when the whole, like, Geo Magic Burst strat, like, that's all anyone did because it was so strong. And it was funny because I remember reading in forums a little while after that, they went ahead and nerfed Geo, and then who ends up now being, like, seen as one of the best DPS? It's now a Ranger. And it's like, I'm literally getting trashed, you know, a couple months beforehand, before the community's like, oh, Ranger's one of the top-end DPS. And before that had come out, I'm being literally told an idiot that I don't know what I'm talking about and I should shut the fuck up and, you know, this, that, and the other, and you shouldn't be saying things that you don't know what you're talking about. But yet I could see that potential there while no one was tapping into it. And then they don't even make any changes to other jobs. They nerf a job that buffs other jobs, and now all of a sudden it's seen as really high end. I just found that extremely funny. And that's kind of how pretty much almost everyone in this show was. They thought they were so amazing and everything, but then I remember going there with, you know, 6 to 12 people doing Reginima Tier 2 NMs, and 50% of the time we're wiping. And these guys have top-end gear, and yet at this point I can go solo or duo those NMs with trust. I mean, at this point I'm, you know, have more top-end gear, and I'm obviously significantly more geared than I was back then. Back then I wasn't well geared. Like, my best thing I had was Alluvian skirmish gear with either crappy or no augments on it. So, I mean, I had a very extremely long way to go in terms of, you know, being decently geared. But I even remember after one event where we were doing the whole Magic Burst event, because that's when, before Geo was nerfed, and I was there on Black Mage, because I remember leveling Black Mage because I knew it was an easy job that you could take and plug in without having a ton of gear to be amazing, and it would still do alright. And I remember trying, because at that point, Black Mage was my second job to 75, so I knew it well, but you basically couldn't really double Magic Burst back in the days. Well, with all the fast cast gear and everything that was, you know, available now, it was like, okay, I knew that you could double Magic Burst, and I remember trying to do it. And I remember being yelled at multiple times from the people, basically being like, you know, stop stop trying to double Magic Burst and, like, low tier nuke on it because you're raising the resistance of the mob and this, that, and the other. And also, you know, we want one of our top end Black Mages to be the first one to land the nuke. And I'm like, why is it you have top-end master Black Mages with, you know, arguably just straight up the best gear you can have, and why are they not double Magic Bursting? Because they should have been. And it's like, I'm playing at a higher skill than you guys, but yet I'm being told to not do anything because they don't feel like trying harder. Because they feel like just being lazy and just, oh, we'll just,
you know, Magic Burst. Like, I'm sorry, if you're a top-end Black Mage and then you have someone who hasn't played the job and isn't even used to the new gear and content, how it's played, why is it that you shouldn't be able to snipe over me? Like, I just don't get it. It was just sad. And I mean, I remember one event, and I just came out on White Mage because they just wanted a healer. They wanted to do, you know, Ifrit very difficult just to farm, you know, what is it, Plutons, Betsu, and Riftborn Bowlers. And I remember, because I had recently came back, one of the members was literally ridiculing me for not having the home point. And it's like, how am I supposed to have the home point when you didn't have these home point warps in the game when I quit? And now I recently came back, and I don't have it, and now I'm being made fun of and ridiculed because I don't have it? I mean, I just don't get, you know, their just thought process on it. And then, when I finally get there, and get in the zone, then the person's even ridiculing forward. They're like, did you make sure you get the home point so we don't have to, you know, wait for you next time? And it's like, I didn't even answer. I'm like, I'm not even going to lower myself to answer that question. Of course I fucking got it. It was just sad that everyone just treated us like trash when they don't even have skill. Like I said, I remember so many times us wiping to just, like I said, tier 2 Reginima mobs. And I'm like, you guys are supposed to be the best link shell on the server. Shouldn't we be wiping the floor with it? And then on top of that, actually that same time where I got chewed out on Black Mage, where literally the leader literally, like, just after the event was over, literally just sat there while everyone was there and basically being like, what the fuck are you doing? You're nuking wrong, and what's the fuck's up with your gear? You should have this, and you should have that, and this and the other. I'm like, dude, I just came back to the game. I'm like, and everything I've been progressing to this point, you know, I've made progress. I'm like, I am 119. I'm actually trying. I actually have, yes, it wasn't good gear, but I mean, I'm at least putting in effort. And the sad part is, the same guy who's chewing me out ended up having someone else come on Thief who doesn't even have Thief Knife. So literally, and then mid-run, they're bitching about drops, and it's like, the dude you asked to come only has TH3. And the other funny thing is, that same guy who they brought with TH3, he was at the very first event I ever went to with them, and he was on there on Black Mage when me and Yells were on Black Mage, and at that point he had better gear. But at this point, when we were doing the one event, when I got chewed out, I had better gear because I had progressed, and he had done absolutely nothing. And it's like, and you guys are bitching about drops, but then you bring a TH3 Thief. Actually, I basically say TH0. He's only getting TH3 because of Thief traits, because he's 99. And it's like, really? And then I said something, and I was like, I could have come Thief. My Thief has max TH. And then he's like, well, he doesn't have any other jobs to come as. I'm like, his Black Mage was better geared than mine a week ago. And yet he has nothing else to come, and yet you're having me come Black Mage. It was just sad how much these guys were idiots. Like I said, our one buddy who was like a leader in the shell, he was always cool. And there was one other guy who was in the shell, was really cool. Other than that, either everyone else in the shell was non-existent, or they were an elitist douchebag who honestly didn't have much skill. They just basically had top-end gear and just blew everything up and thought they were amazing. And it was just sad. So at that point, me and Yells just got fed up. It's like, really? We're one of, and me and Yells could easily see we're some of the best skilled players in there. We just don't have the gear. And it's like, you give us some time, we'll have the gear, and then we'll be crushing you guys. The sad part is they didn't see it. They're just looking in the moment and just being like, oh, well, he's not getting good numbers on whatever. Another thing is, for one of the events, they had Yells come out on White Mage to heal an entire alliance of 18 people. Solo! No other healers. And it's just like, really? You have a returning player who you know only has about 2 months of playtime post-Adeline, and yet you want them to come heal a whole freaking alliance? It's like, what's wrong with you? So like I said, after that we got fed up. We both decided to quit because we were like, we're done. And eventually, it was like, I was like, well, we had fun when we were soloing before we joined that one link shell. And so we came back again, which was probably at this point, I don't even know, 2-3 months ago? Because at this point, probably only have 5 months of playtime post-Adeline. All my other playtime, which is years upon years, has been pre-Adeline. And so then we started playing, and we decided, we're like, oh no, we're gonna server transfer. It's like Valifor's dead. Well, we don't want to do anything with this link shell because you guys are complete assholes who honestly don't even really know what you're doing. You just, have good gear and just cookie cutter do everything, and yet you think you're amazing. And so, what is it? Made sure, talked to our one buddy from our old link shell, Mages, let him know that, we were leaving and that we missed. And I even said to him, I was like, basically, you would have been the only reason we would have wanted to stay on the server. Because at this point, I was like, the server's dead. We don't want to deal with the crap from the link shell. And we'd rather go somewhere where, there's actually events happening. And so then we switched to Azure, and as the rest is history. At that point, we've just been progressing. It's like the vast majority of progress we've made solo or duo, and that's why, most of our videos are more focused around that. So, if you are coming back, just know you don't even need a link shell, but you do need to be able to form groups with at least up to 6 people to, progress and get things done in this game. But, I mean, you don't need a high-end link shell, and it is what it is. The main point is, are you having fun with the game? If you're not having fun with the game, then you maybe should go do something else. If you're enjoying the game, then by all means enjoy it and try and make the best progress that you can. Like I said, I'm going to keep making, guide videos like I have. Try and do, more with that. I still have laundry lists, and I know that list is going to keep growing. I do plan on doing some live streams of 11 at some point. It's kind of hard to find content, because I don't want to just, stream, I'm just going to go into SG Zone and pop a few NMs and stuff. I've seen other people do that for live streams, but I've tried watching them, and I seem just extremely boring. I want it to be more focused. I was requested to do high-tier battles. I might live stream that, where I'm just going through and doing some high-tier battles. Do a mix of ones, and maybe give, my strategy, do it either solo or low man. And, do some things like that that's a little more focused. So there's definitely more things coming down the pipe. I am going to do some more videos like this. This video ended up going significantly longer than I was planning it. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I'm going to keep making content. Feel free to give me feedback on what type of what type of videos you guys would like to see, because I would be happy to, try and do that. Having more ideas is only going to make things easier and give me more focus to get stuff done. So, again, thank you for listening to my, long story of my history with Final Fantasy in general and Final Fantasy XI. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got some value out of it and, learned a little bit about me and my history. And, keep up with your guys' progress and, again, have success in all you do.